everyone, it's Ali. Thanks so much for joining me today for this tutorial on how to make this easy autumnal themed card. I've got tons of tips and tricks in this video for you, so whether you're a beginner or a seasoned card maker, I really hope you learn something new. Let's get started. The stamp set I'm going to be using today is one from AliExpress. This is also originally a Heffy Doodle design. I do try really hard not to buy replica stamp sets or dies from AliExpress. Unfortunately, sometimes they do slip through. It seems a shame to waste them though, so I'm still going to get the use out of them. To get started on this card, I'm going to pull out my Tim Holtz stamp positioning tool. I use this on nearly every card I make because it makes it so much easier when you're doing stamping, especially with cheaper stamps like this because they don't always stamp very well the first time. I've got a few tips to share with you to help you stamp a little bit better, especially if you've got cheaper stamps as well. So I'm going to be using Memento ink in Tuxedo Black because I want to colour these in with alcohol markers, and that is an alcohol marker friendly ink. My first tip is to gently tap your ink pad onto your stamps rather than swiping, because that will make sure the ink stays on the stamp instead of being wiped off. My second tip would be to keep stamping until you get a good impression. There may be some areas that you need to press a little harder or just use concentrated pressure. So I'm using my stamping tool here that my friend Gareth made for me, which is just a heavy felt bottom tool that makes it easy to apply pressure all over the stamp positioner. But then for the corn, I will use my thumbs and just press on that particular area just to make sure that I get a good impression. Whenever I get all my stamps out, I tend to stamp more than once just to make sure that, you know, I've got some extra stuff for my stash. I'm going to stamp all of the sentiments now from the set. I know I can use these on future cards, so while I've got all my stuff out, I may as well stamp several. I'm also going to use VersaFine ink for these rather than the Memento because I get a nice crisp impression with my VersaFine. I always tend to use that one for sentiments. I'm using Onyx Black because it's a classic and I always use that for my sentiments pretty much. Again, just tapping onto the stamps is the best way to apply, and then make sure that you have applied even pressure all over. Once I've stamped the first one, I know that my magnet is too close to my stamp, so I need to move that away. And then also there is more ink on one side of the sentiment than the other, so I need to make sure that I press down a little bit harder on the opposite side of the sentiment just to make sure they even out. So that is my sentiment stamped. Now, VersaFine takes a little while to dry because it is a pigment ink. So I want to make sure that I clean my stamps thoroughly to make sure that they're good for another day. So I'll use stamp cleaner on them as well as a microfiber cloth. And then I'm going to heat emboss these because then I can carry on with my card. If I left them to dry, they would dry, but I would probably have to leave them overnight just to make sure that they didn't smudge. I'm going to use some clear embossing powder from Wow on these, and that will make sure that the ink is captured underneath and there's no smudging, and it will also add a little bit of shine to my sentiment as well. So that's an easy way to just speed up your card making. I use a coffee filter to catch the loose embossing powder so I can pour it back into the pot. That is a good tip if you've got any of those knocking around in your house. And then I'm going to use my heat tool to set my embossing powder. I like to apply heat from the back and the front of the cardstock because it stops the cardstock warping and you can make sure that your sentiments are nice and flat. I also like to do heat embossing several sentiments at a time because it's quite a lot of hassle to get all the bits out, so I can use all the others on another project. Now I've done my sentiment, I need to colour in all my images, so I'm using alcohol markers for this. Alcohol markers are one of my favourite things to use when colouring because it's so quick, it's easy to get a good blend, you can get nice vibrant colours, and depending on which alcohol markers you buy, they can be quite affordable. I've got quite a lot of different brands of alcohol markers and I do like all of them to different degrees. I don't have any Copics or any of the more expensive brands, but the brands I have include Nova, Touch New, I've got some from Tiger, if you guys have heard of that shop, and I like all of them. One thing I would recommend if you have a lot of different brands of markers is to make sure you swatch them all out somewhere. I do have a swatch book that I use sometimes, but when I'm doing a project like this, I tend to just swatch them on the paper that I'm using so I can make sure I can find darker and lighter tones for my blending. So that's the little scribbles next to the images that you'll see there. That's me trying out all the different colours and making sure I've got the right, you know, shade of orange for a shadow. The colouring I'm doing is not particularly complicated. I tend to use a darker colour to add a bit of shading, and in some of the images I've added a little bit of texture. So on the butternut squash, I've done some little stripes just to add a little bit of texture to the butternut squash so it's not all the same colour. And then on my sweet corn I've done little dots, which is one of my favourite techniques to use of alcohol markers. I think it looks really nice and it's a nice way to add shading and texture and a little bit of interest to a stamp, whereas otherwise it might be quite samey and the same colour all over. I'm not a professional colourist. I just learned from watching YouTube videos and playing around with my own markers, and I'm not the best colourist on YouTube, but I do enjoy using my markers, so I did want to leave all of the colouring in just to show you exactly how I did it. And I encourage you to give it a go if you've got alcohol markers and you've never used them before, or there's something you'd like to try. I would recommend giving it a go. What have you got to lose? I really enjoy them as a medium, and I love using them on my cards to colour in my elements. So I've coloured all these in now. I need to cut them out. I'm going to fussy cut these because I don't have the coordinating dies to go with this set. Don't tend to buy the coordinating dies because I find cutting them out with scissors is, you know, pretty simple, and it doesn't really take that much longer than having to try and line up the dies, which I find a pain in the bum. There's all my elements cut out now, and then I just need to assemble my card. So I'm going to use the Craft Perfect Woodland Walk paper pad for this project. I'm using this brown, I mean, I would call this tartan or gingham, but I know some of you guys would call it plaid, so I mean, you know, I'm going to use the dark brown tartan, and then I'm going to use a scrap that I cut off just to add a bit of extra interest. The card I'm going to make is 5x7, so I've cut the piece of paper down to 4x6, which leaves me in, you know, an inch around the edge. And then I'm going to ink blend onto this strip just to give it a little bit of extra dimension. You don't have to do that, I just thought it would be a nice thing to add to the card. Now I've stuck those down with double-sided sticky tape, and I'm going to trim down my sentiment. I like to use my Tim Holtz trimmer for this because I get a nice crisp edge. When you're making a really small sentiment though, sometimes I just have to go in with scissors because I can't get it quite the same on both sides. So that is the sentiment ready to go. So now I just need to arrange all of my elements on the card. It does sometimes take me a little while to do this, and I will lay them out and play around with them. Just try and find a little bit of balance on the card. This time I balanced the orange and the purple on opposite corners of the card, and I decided that was the best way that I wanted them laid out. Then I'm going to glue them down. I'm going to use this liquid glue because it's easier to position the elements. If you need to move them around a little bit and you haven't got them quite the right place, you have a little bit of wiggle room with liquid glue. You do have to be careful not to apply too much or to press down too hard because it will start to squirt out of the sides. But if you use a clear drying glue, generally you can't really tell on the finished card anyway, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. I'm just going to glue all of these down onto my card, and then when I'm finished I'm going to put a clear block on top and just hold that down, and then my phone on top of that because it was the closest, heaviest thing I had to hand. This is going to make sure that all of my elements dry fairly flat on the card and none of them are going to try and peel off later. So the last thing I'm going to do on this card is add a little bit of sparkle. So I've got some sequins from my stash. I've had these for years and I don't think I've ever used them, so I thought I'd crack them out and use them on this card. They were the right kind of colour. So I'm going to scatter a few of those on the card. I like to lay them out on the card first and decide where they're going to go before I glue them down. And then I'm also going to use some of these gems. These are actually sold as nail art gems. I get them off AliExpress and they come in tons of different colours. This is a nice neutral colour selection in this wheel. You just spin the little plastic lid around and you can grab the ones that you want. And they're great for card making because they're the right kind of size and they come in lots of different sizes within the colours. I've got quite a lot of these. You might have seen them in a previous AliExpress haul and I use them all the time. They're probably one of my most used sets of gems that I bought, so they were definitely worth the investment. I mean, not that it's a big investment because they cost like £1. I'm just going to glue these down with liquid glue. Again, I'm using the same glue but I've put it in a smaller bottle with a tiny nozzle just because otherwise the glue is going to come like glooping out and just go everywhere. So this glue does dry clear, so you'll see it white on the card, but you'll see in the pictures at the end that you cannot see the glue once it's dried, and that's great for me because I always end up blurting it everywhere, and you know the gems, you can see the glue around them because I'm a bit haphazard with my glue. I'm not the best gluer in the world, but you know, as long as you have enough glue to hold your bits and bobs on your card, that is what matters, and that's why they all dry clear. So that is everything for this card today. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. This was a nice easy one, this tutorial, but I hope you found it inspiring and I hope you come back and watch some more of my videos. I've got a lot more tutorials on my channel. I'll link my playlist of tutorials up in the cards and also in the description box if you want to go and check any of them out. Please don't forget to give this video a like before you leave and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks again for watching and I hope to see you back here on my channel again soon. Bye!